Now, I am Dustin Baker. We are counting down the days to training camp. We're less than 3 weeks now, about 20 days away. We have a Monday night episode with Sean Kinner. Usually he's our Saturday night sniper, but he's joining us Monday because he's got some hot take to reveal a prediction. How are you, Sean?
Oh man, I'm great. You know me. I always like talking Vikings football, and I can get a little spicy from time. So I
Yeah,
think we're gonna get spicy tonight.
yeah. This is the spicy show from you because this show came to fruition off a Twitter nugget where you had a hot take, and I said, "Come on the damn show and talk about it." You're like, "Hell yeah, man!" And that's why we're here right now. We're joined by producer Tyler. How are you, homie?
I'm chilling, man. Chilling on a Monday. Was writing an article all day. It's just kind of a slog. It's still early July, so there's nothing to talk about right now, at least for Dolphins, at least, because it's just Tua stuff. Oh, by the way, I write covering the Dolphins as well because I'm a maniac.
3 more weeks, man. 3 more weeks till training camp.
Three more weeks.
I will say, for those that care, I've been writing about the Vikings for over 4 years now, and usually the 4th of July is the symbolic turning of the page where the NFL analysis sites like Sharp Football Analysis, this is when they start revealing their 2024 stuff or their new season stuff. So indeed, we've been in a dry season for new happenings for the last 3 weeks. But I can tell you from experience that the hoopla really picks up. It'll probably be this weekend. And then once we get training camp, as everyone knows, then there's no looking back, especially for the players. Bryant McKinney always tells me that once we get down to the second week of July, that's the last of normalcy, because then it's straight grind for whatever 6 or 7 months. But we digress. We are here to talk about training camp. What we have on the agenda, you can probably tell from the episode title and the YouTube icon, is Jalen Nailor. And the Vikings have a WR3 opening for a couple reasons. KJ Osborne bolted to the Patriots in free agency. We shall see if he makes that team, probably as their WR3 or WR4. The Vikings had an absolutely golden opportunity in the draft to select a WR3 candidate of the future because there was about 10 to 15 guys with that type of upside. No cigar. They drafted 0 wide receivers, drafted 0 running backs. They have some UDFAs in the house, but right now the table is set for what we think is a 3-way battle, maybe 2-way battle between Brandon Powell, Jalen Nailor, and Trent Sherfield. And we have SK on the show tonight because he has been vociferous about saying Jalen Nailor isn't even going to be a factor really in the end game of the depth chart because his ass will be cut. So as an opening salvo, I want to hear from you why you're emphatic about this.
Oh man, if I'm just gonna jump right into it, it's with Jalen Nailor, and I'm gonna start with this. I'm not against Jalen Nailor. I don't hate the guy. I'm not sitting here trying to bash him for this entire episode by any means. But every single offseason, and it didn't necessarily start with just Jalen Nailor. It happens almost every offseason. There's always a guy that we draft later on in the draft, or even an undrafted free agent, to where he gets a little hype around the fan base and everybody's a fan of him, and he's going to make the 53-man roster, and he's going to be a factor, and he's going to be wide receiver 3. We've been waiting for Jalen Nailor to be wide receiver 3 for 2 years now, and we're going on 3. So it's the same story every single offseason. And guess what? It ends the same way. It ends with Jalen Nailor either ending up on IR, ending up, as Dustin mentioned before we even came on air, Jalen Nailor had the flu this offseason, so he couldn't attend mini camp. So it's always something that has to do with Jalen Nailor's injury or having the flu. There's always something that's stopping him from making this 53-man roster. And if you were to ask me, I'm sick and tired of putting these unreal expectations on the guy that never works out. And again, it's not just Jalen Nailor. We always do this, and it always seems to be a wide receiver. Years ago, it was Courtney Davis, undrafted free agent out of, was it Texas A&M, I believe it was, where he had this big hype train. Oh my God, we got one of the best wide receivers in the draft, and we didn't even have to use a draft pick on him. He's going to make the 53-man roster. And guess what? He never panned out. He never made that 53-man roster. He ended up on the practice squad, and God knows where he's playing now. So it's kind of the same thing every offseason, and Jalen Nailor is not the exception. So
the reason I think that pro Nailor stuff has gotten more so hot and heavy than usual is because right after minicamp, ESPN put out an article, Kevin Seifert, 5 observations or what have you from minicamp, and I'm going to quote Mr. Seifert here. Nailor, a 6th-round pick in 2022, struggled with injuries throughout 2023 and into this offseason. He missed mandatory minicamp because of the flu, but in limited playing time during the first 2 NFL seasons and more frequently in practice, he has proven a slippery target that defenders have trouble tackling. In 2 seasons, he has taken a total of 160 snaps and run routes of 72 on them. Vikings quarterbacks targeted him on 20 of those routes, and he caught 12 catches for 208 yards and a touchdown. And then Seifert uses a Kevin O'Connell quote that says, Jalen has always been a guy that when he's healthy and on the field, he shows up every single opportunity he's gotten. That's our challenge to him. Sometimes things are out of our control, and we understand that. But for him to take the next step, we're going to need to see him out there a lot as part of that group. So it was kind of a pro Nailor synopsis, like why mention him if the team wasn't high on him. So we have Sean here that says this guy is unreliable, even if it's no fault of his own. Do you differ from this Nailor will be cut prognostication?
I think Nailor wins wide receiver 3 by default, and here's why. So Brandon Powell, as much as I love the guy, is ideally a sort of wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5, who is primarily like a punt returner, right? And the thing with special teams guys are that you don't want them in a prominent role because they're already an injury risk. So just by virtue of playing on special teams, you're more likely to get hurt. That being said, Nailor has dealt with his fair share of injuries, and that is annoying. I get what Sean's saying when he's like, Nailor, he's never healthy whenever the opportunity presents itself. But here's the thing. Nailor's first year here, he was a late round wide receiver. There was zero expectation for the guy. We had Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen. It was KJ Osborne in his 2nd or 3rd year or something. He wasn't going to be the wide receiver 3. So that's just a wash. And then I believe last year was KJ Osborne was firmly wide receiver 3. We drafted Jordan Addison. He hasn't really legitimately had a chance to be wide receiver 3. Last year, it was more wide receiver 4, and he got hurt. And the reason I think he's ultimately going to be wide receiver 3 is just because, are you expecting Trent Sherfield, who's done nothing in his career, to step up and be that guy when he's new to this offense? I don't believe that. I think Brandon Powell, given the fact that they changed the rules on special teams to where now returning has much more of an emphasis, he's going to be more important there. So you really need someone who is going to be able to focus all of their energy at just being a wide receiver 3. And I think with last offseason, when he was getting some of those first team reps, they were trying to prepare him for, maybe a wide receiver 3-ish role, but even then they had Osborne. So it's really hard to tell. But I feel like for the past offseason or so, they've really been trying to groom Nailor into the wide receiver 3 because Kwesi's trying to moneyball that position. The Vikings aren't going to sign Hunter Renfrow as much as we all want to. So I just don't see any legit competition for Nailor at wide receiver 3. And that's my take.
So, Sean, almost by default, you have to disagree here a little bit. But if Nailor doesn't make the team per your prediction, then what?
Well, I'm looking at the wide receivers that we do have on roster right now. And I do think we go out and we possibly make another move. And it's not going to be a big move. I think it's going to be one of those really cheap, maybe veteran minimum guys. Bring them in just to bring some competition. So I don't think we're going to make some big splash move, like you said, Hunter Renfrow or anything like that. I don't see that coming. But just looking at the guys that we have on roster right now, obviously Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, Brandon Powell, I don't see in any world Jalen Nailor beating out Brandon Powell for that wide receiver 3 spot. I actually like Brandon Powell at wide receiver 3. I think he did some really good things last year, and he adds an extra kind of dynamic. Not a very good guy to be your lead blocker for a QB sneak or to push your QB over for a couple inches, that's probably not the right guy to do so. But you look at Brandon Powell, and even this offseason, if we're talking about people that have had a decent offseason or had a good offseason, mini camp and OTAs, Trent Sherfield has actually had a pretty good mini camp. If we look at highlights, I mean, I'm not there in person, obviously. I can't see every single play. But Trent Sherfield has kind of been the guy that J.J. McCarthy has been favoriting, in these targets that we see on these highlights that the Minnesota Vikings kind of release. So I think Trent Sherfield is actually going to be that competition. And I'm a big Tristan Jackson guy. I think this is the year that Tristan Jackson actually makes this 53-man roster. And that's who Jalen Nailor is competing with to take that last spot, because Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, Brandon Powell, I think Trent Sherfield makes this team not necessarily for the wide receiver 4 spot. I think he fits more into the special teams kind of side of things. But then you look at Tristan Jackson and Jalen Nailor, and if we look at production in meaningful games, Tristan Jackson has showed up when he's actually had the opportunity. We saw it last year. I believe it was either against New Orleans or Atlanta, where he had a big 2-point conversion that actually got us in the game or got us up in the game. When he has the opportunities, he makes plays. I love Tristan Jackson. I think he takes that next step this year, and he makes this 53-man roster going into week 1. Now, if we're looking at Jalen Nailor and we're looking at this production and kind of what he's done on the field, let's look at the games he's actually produced and put up numbers in. And we got to go all the way back to 2022, because if we go back to 2023, granted, he was out half of the season. He was on IR, which, again, your best ability is your availability. Jalen Nailor hasn't been available. But the games that he did play in, New Orleans, 1 reception, 16 yards. Was active at Denver, was active against Chicago, was active against the Raiders, who he had 2 receptions for 13 yards, finished with 3 receptions for 29 yards on the season. And when Justin Jefferson got hurt, that was his opportunity to be raised up to this 53-man roster and get that playing time and actually make a difference. But guess who they brought up instead? Tristan Jackson. Because I believe KOC actually had just, we hear these positive things about Jalen Nailor. I think KOC has kind of a soft spot for Tristan Jackson. That's the reason why he stayed on this team, whether it be the practice squad half the time or whether it be the 53-man roster. He went out, now I believe that was his first signing after KOC was hired as the Minnesota Vikings head coach, was Tristan Jackson. He brings the type of play from a receiver that we don't necessarily have. Obviously, he's not the level of a Justin Jefferson. He's not the level of a Jordan Addison. He's not the same type of receiver as a Brandon Powell, but he's a big body guy, someone you can throw up that 50-50 ball where he can come down with it. So I love Tristan Jackson, but if you look at the games that Jalen Nailor actually produced in, again, let's go all the way back to 2022. The first game against Dallas. And we all remember that game, right? 1 reception for 15 yards. The score was 40-3 in that game. Let's go to the next game that he put up any numbers, was against the good old Green Bay Packers. And that was his big game. That was his big breakout game where, oh my God, Jalen Nailor, he might actually have something in the tank for us. When he caught his first reception, you want to know what the score of the game of that game was? 41-3. That's when Jalen Nailor made his first reception in that game, was 41-3. 3 receptions for 89 yards and 1 touchdown. And the following game, the last game of the season against Chicago, an absolutely meaningless game to where we already locked up a playoff spot. I think we're already locked into the 3 seed that season, I believe. When we ended up 11 and no. We ended up 12 and 4.
13.
Somewhere along those lines. So we had already wrapped up a playoff spot. We only played Kirk Cousins for 1 half and ended up playing Nick Mullins for the rest of the game. The Chicago Bears started Nathan Peterman that game. And you want to know who the cornerbacks for the Chicago Bears were? Our old buddy Harrison Hand. Does anybody know where Harrison Hand is now? No, nobody does. I don't think he's in the league anymore. He put up 4 receptions for 62 yards, no touchdowns, in a meaningless game against the Chicago Bears. So what Jalen Nailor has shown me and what it reminds me of is the old Oli Udoh effect. You guys remember that game against the Chicago Bears, last game of the season, where Oli Udoh had a career game against Khalil Mack, and everybody was excited for Oli Udoh the very next season because he had such an amazing game against Khalil Mack. It was a meaningless game. The Bears didn't care about that game. Khalil Mack was not trying to go out there and give 100% and hurt himself in a meaningless game. And we put all our, I'm not going to say all our chips, but we put a lot of expectation on Oli Udoh. And what did Oli Udoh do next season? Looked absolutely terrible. So I hate to do it to Jalen Nailor, but I put him in that same category as Oli Udoh. Any production that he's put out there has been in blowout losses or an absolutely meaningless game with backups. I haven't seen him produce in a game that means anything. So, and again, going back to where he had the opportunity last year when he did get healthy and he was off of IR, Justin Jefferson is on IR. That's your opportunity to slide into that wide receiver 3 spot. But they decided to bring in Tristan Jackson. Tristan Jackson was the one that was getting the playing time. You got 1 reception for 16 yards against the New Orleans Saints, and you had 2 receptions for 13 yards against the Las Vegas Raiders. So I haven't seen anything on the field that makes me feel like Jalen Nailor is a wide receiver 3 or should even be on this 53-man roster. I understand he has talent. They called him Speedy for a reason. He was great at Michigan State, but he hasn't shown on the field that he can be reliable, and he hasn't shown off the field that he can be reliable. So when people say he's wide receiver 3, I don't see it.
Yeah, you want to talk about guys who are the epitome of unreliable, flashing in the offseason and getting hurt right before the season. That's your guy. That's Tristan Jackson. Listen, I love Tristan Jackson. He's a great wide receiver 6. He deserves to be on this roster. But look, you can't make the case that Jalen Nailor is this unreliable wide receiver who's always hurt and then sit here and then prop up another dude who has the same exact resume. I just think the argument's in such bad faith. You're trying to make a holistic evaluation of a guy who's got very limited playing time and say he's garbage because he's got, a game in 2022 against New Orleans where he's got 1 reception for 13 yards, right? Well, how many targets did he have? He had 1. He caught his only pass.
There's a reason why he only had 1 target, because he wasn't on the field. And there's a reason why he wasn't on the field. He was healthy.
Yeah, because he was wide receiver 4 or 5 in 2022. He wasn't asked to be wide receiver 3 back then. Like he was just like an end of roster guy. It's unfair to say, hey, look, our 5th string wide receiver isn't getting 5 targets a game. That means he's garbage. No, it doesn't. It just means
you're talking about 2022 or 2023?
2022. Like I was just using this for an example, right? You have a lot of these games, early in his career where he's getting, 1 reception a game, 13 yards, nothing spectacular. And you're trying to make this argument where it's like, okay, he's not getting, catches, so therefore he's garbage. No, it's just he's not getting targets. I mean, he hasn't had a ton of inefficient games where he's getting targeted like a bunch and then dropping passes. We haven't really seen that from him. He had 1 against Dallas. That was the blowout where we got blown out 3-40. I mean, and Dallas has a really good defense even in 2022. He had 3 targets, 1 reception for 15 yards. If 33% of his passes were actually caught. So if you want to hold the Dallas game against him, sure. But late in 2022, you have the Minnesota at Green Bay. 3 targets, 3 receptions, 89 yards, touchdown. I mean, that's a really good game. Now, am I going to hype him up because he had a really good game late in the season against Green Bay? No.
It was 41-3 when he made his first reception in that game, and he was wide open.
But it's a team game, dude. You're blaming Jalen Nailor for
there's a reason why his first reception came when the score was 41-3. There's a reason why his first reception came at that point in the game. It's garbage time. This wasn't like it was early in the game, first quarter, where, it's a close, tight game and he made these big receptions. These were in meaningless times of games where it didn't matter. Chad Beebe had bigger moments than Jalen Nailor has had. Tristan Jackson has one big reception that's bigger than any Jalen Nailor reception in his career.
I just look, I get what you're saying. Jalen Nailor hasn't proven anything. For all we know, you could be absolutely right. We could cut the guy because he just can't stay on the field. I'm not saying that's impossible. I'm just saying that, look, it's unfair to hold these 2022 games against him, these 2023 games. And it's also unfair to sit here and say, wow, he had one really good game against Green Bay. He's the next Jake Reed or whatever. No, like we don't know what we have in him. We think we like him. He was getting some first team reps, last offseason. He was getting some this offseason. We're not going to know Jack until training camp. And to be honest with you, the whole Jalen Nailor missing minicamp with a flu is like, in terms of injuries, is absolutely meaningless. Yes, he's had injury concerns. And yes, that is a huge thing. Even going back to his time in Michigan State, like that was a problem with him. It was never a question of talent. It was a question of durability. He's fast, but he's not durable. He's just kind of a speed guy, right? So he's got to stay healthy. But if he stays healthy in camp and he has a good camp, he has a shot, just as much as a shot as Tristan Jackson or any of these other guys on this depth chart. So I think it's too early to rule the guy out.
I think where I'm at here on Mr. Nailor is, first of all, we have precedent for this where we were semi-high or kind of high on a wide receiver, and then boom, he was cut. That was Amir Smith-Marset. We spoke exactly about him as we do about Jalen Nailor, and then he was let go unceremoniously after a Jalen Reagor trade. And I'm with Sean that last year was the absolute golden opportunity for Nailor to appear like a WR3 or WR2 with Jefferson out for ultimately 7 games. And I remember I stopped thinking he was even an option after like 3 weeks into it because I've stopped researching what's wrong with him because I just don't. It doesn't interest me anymore. It's so usually usually I have to do my diligence when I'm writing an injury report. I don't even bother going to look anymore because I'm like, oh, it's some damn thing. So I think the problem, like Tyler talked about, is the durability because at Michigan State in 2018 he played 8 games. In 2019 he played 4 games. In 2020. 7 games, and in 2021, 9 games. So every single season of meaningful football for him is derailed or at least cut short by some sort of injury. So when the Vikings venture into this season, sans a true blue WR3 and really needing one for a month or two because Hawkinson's gone, I think that they just secretly kind of love Brandon Powell because Trent Sherfield has only had over 200 receiving yards once in his 6 seasons. And then we already know Nailor is just a humongous maybe about being available at all. And then we get to the undrafted guys where they're just inherently lottery tickets. So the more that I think about it, they either want to see how the chips fall with Powell as the front runner. And if it goes shitty, they can sign some guy after roster cut down day. Or they could always dangle some sort of late round draft pick for who we've talked about on the show, Treylon Burks. But I don't see the blossom finally of Jalen Nailor because kind of along with what Sean said, I learned my lesson with Irv Smith. And Irv Smith actually looked good a couple times, especially finding the red zone.
He had his moments.
Yeah, every year there is a player or two who we get unduly excited for because of the raw talent. And then it just never takes off. So I don't think it's an accident that every year at Michigan State, now the first 2 years in Minneapolis, it's like, couldn't quite get there. Maybe it'll be next year. I think there's too much of a track record.
I mean, let's look at it this way. There's another guy on this roster that is always injury prone, probably produces a whole lot better. And this is a different position, produces a whole lot better than what Jalen Nailor does. And he's on the chopping block. We're all expecting this guy to get cut. And that's Andrew Booth.
Mm-hmm.
He's a 2nd round pick. And when he is healthy, he actually plays pretty damn good. But we're all expecting him to get cut. Now, I understand we probably have a lot more defensive backs or cornerbacks that are capable than maybe wide receivers do. So that kind of opens the door a little bit more for Jalen Nailor to possibly make this 53-man roster. But most of us at least think Andrew Booth is a cut candidate. Why isn't Jalen Nailor the 5th or 6th round pick 2 years ago that hasn't produced, that can't stay healthy? What's the difference?
Yeah,
I'll tell you the difference. The difference is, yes, one, Andrew Booth has higher draft pedigree than Jalen Nailor does. But the difference is there's no one established at wide receiver 3 at all for these Vikings. We have a ton of young, interesting corners. We have Byron Murphy. We just signed Shaq Griffin. Cornerback is set. There's no chance for opportunity for Booth, even if he somehow broke out in year 3. With Nailor, it's slim pickings at wide receiver 3. And I don't even think the problem is necessarily Jalen Nailor himself. It's the fact that the Vikings, for the longest time, for the past 10 years, and that's not an exaggeration. You go back to 2014 and Charles Johnson and all that, Michael Floyd, all these wide receiver 3s that we, just some third-rate free agents that we're taking a chance on, or we draft some guy in the 6th or 7th round and we expect that eventually in 2 years' time that player is going to rise as the wide receiver 3. At best, you get KJ Osborne, a serviceable, okay, but nothing spectacular wide receiver 3. At worst, you get Dylan Mitchell, you get Amir Smith-Marset, you get any obscure name that didn't stick around for more than a year. Heck, Olabisi Johnson is in the same category as Nailor, where you have like a somewhat promising wide receiver 3 who just can't stay healthy and they eventually get cut. The
BC
problem
had
is
one injury though. He had the ACL.
Yeah, two of them.
It wasn't a continuous injury prone issue for BC. BC was far better than what Jalen Nailor has shown. When BC was healthy, he was productive.
Like, he's all,
Let's not forget,
he's not available.
Justin Jefferson was behind BC on the depth chart. Not that it was right, but he was behind BC on the
Zimmer
depth chart.
was stubborn as hell, man. Olabisi, and I love BC, but there's no justification for that.
He was good. He was good when he was healthy.
I liked him, but over Jefferson, even as a rookie in the first round, it's crazy.
We all know that. Come on now, Tyler. We all knew that.
It's Mike Zimmer. What do you expect, right?
Yeah.
He's going to start the established veteran over the unproven rookie, even if that rookie's a first-round wide receiver that you were glad Philadelphia didn't take one pick before you. But look, it's the problem with the Vikings is that they just don't invest in wide receiver 3. And, it's the same storyline every offseason. And honestly, for the longest time, I thought it was one of the most overrated storylines. You look at wide receiver 3. Oh, who's our wide receiver 3? It used to be overrated because it didn't matter who our wide receiver 3 was, because we're going to hand the ball off to Dalvin Cook 20 times a game. We're going to run 2 tight end sets. It really didn't matter who wide receiver 3 was because we were going to use them. Now it does. We have Kevin O'Connell, who runs a ton of 11 personnel. And even when he's running the ball, he's going to have 3 wide receivers out there. The whole 2 tight end set thing's gone. I mean, yes, it's nice to have Aaron Jones and a competent running back like we did with prime Dalvin Cook, but you're going to need a wide receiver 3 if you're going to want to run 11 personnel all the time. You just need a competent wide receiver 3. And right now, Kwesi is moneyballing this roster to where it's just, look, I hope some random guy signed off in the street in Sherfield or Nailor steps up. It's just not the right approach when you have this style of offense that the Vikings want to run, where it's so built upon the passing game first.
There are times throughout the last 2 months when we're doing a show like this, or I'm writing something about WR3, where I stop to myself and pause and say, do we care too much about this? Like, are we getting too deep into the weeds? And then I remember the Hawkinson thing. We're not going to have him for 6-8 games, whatever. But the one that really gets me, that leads me back to no, we're not over exaggerating this, is what if Jefferson or Addison get hurt? Then we're like, oh my dear God, with a quarterback who we don't know if it's any good, either one of the quarterbacks who might play. If you're staring down the barrel of Jordan Addison and Brandon Powell and Trent Sherfield, I don't know. You want there to be one more guy that has that dependability of a WR3. I don't even know if Hunter Renfrow is the answer. This probably needed to be game planned back in March, but that's the only reason I think this topic, in addition to the Hawkinson caveat, is so important to me, is if one of those guys gets dinged up, And we're like, oh God, now what? Because right now it feels like whoever they choose, whether Nailor makes the team or he's cut, it's kind of like gravy because Addison and Jefferson are so damn good. But we saw last year that the depth can be diminished with one hamstring pull. So,
I mean, I think Brandon Powell is competent. I don't get where people are feeling that Brandon Powell can't get it done. I mean, he's not putting up godly numbers by any means, but when Justin Jefferson went down, he became, what was it, the wide? I mean, TJ Hawkinson was healthy majority of that time, so he was really, quote unquote, the wide receiver 2 next to Jordan, really the wide receiver 1 with Jordan Addison in there. But once Justin Jefferson went down, he put up decent numbers. He was a good target for not only Kirk Cousins, but also Joshua Dobbs and also Nick Mullins. So he stepped up in big moments. We've seen it on third down conversions. We've seen it at the end of the game against Atlanta. We saw it multiple times last year where Brandon Powell is capable of shouldering that load as a wide receiver 3. And when you're a wide receiver 3, we don't need you to put up 100-yard games. We have 2 wide receiver 1s that are able to do that. We have a tight end when he's healthy that can do that. So we don't need to have these big, huge numbers out of our wide receiver 3. We need you to make clutch catches in clutch moments when they're doubling Justin Jefferson or they're shading over for TJ Hawkinson when you have a one-on-one matchup. Brandon Powell is able to do that. I haven't seen that from Jalen Nailor. I seen him do it against Harrison Hand in a meaningless game. I seen him do it in a game when we're down 41-3. But I haven't seen him do it when it matters. So I just don't see it. I don't see it yet.
Harrison Hand is notably on the Falcons for anybody that cares.
Okay.
He won't make he won't make the September roster, but he's on the 90 man.
Good for Harrison.
Final thoughts, Tyler?
Yeah, the reason why, at least for me, I'm kind of skittish about Brandon Powell isn't because of his performance. I thought he overperformed last year. He came in and he really asserted himself. He's 5'8". He's 5'8". He is 181 pounds. This guy is smaller than Rob Dillingham. Like, it's... And when you're talking about wide receiver 3 and someone...
He did it with third-string quarterbacks, though, Tyler. He did it with Josh Dobbs and Nick Mullins. It's not like Kirk Cousins was healthy the entire year.
Evan O'Connell can scheme up a good offense regardless who's at quarterback. I don't think it's necessarily Brandon Powell is so good that he was just Superman all the time. I think he's a nice gadget player. He's a nice wide receiver 4. He's just too short, too diminutive to handle, 7+ targets a game. It's one thing if
Jalen Nailor
come in and just overperform, but when people are expecting that you're the wide receiver 3, it's a bit different.
All right, gents. Sean, we'll probably have you back on a week from Saturday night. So we're looking at, what did that be? Let me look here. Probably the 13th to chat with Brevin because we'll have training camp about a week away. And then Tyler, we'll talk to you tomorrow about some more of this roster maintenance stuff. All right, gentlemen?
Sweet.
All right.
You guys have a wonderful evening.
All right. See ya.
Take it easy. Later.